All right, good morning. Happy New Year. That said, my attorney called me the other day, and he was having problems with his plumbing in his house, and could I recommend a plumber? So I gave him the number of the one that I use. So later that day, he called again, and I said, well, how'd it go? And he said, my attorney, he said, well, you know, the plumber came to the house, and he fixed the problem, and 2 hours later, he hands me a bill for $2,000. $2,000 for the plumber. He said, my gosh, man. This is the lawyer. The lawyer says, my gosh, man. He says, I'm an attorney, and I don't make $1,000 an hour. And the plumber says, I didn't either when I was an attorney. So, it's all about consciousness, isn't it? It's all consciousness. So, there are two, my topic today is Kingdom Come, and so really what this for me is about is that there are two really great things that Jesus says about the kingdom. He says that the kingdom of heaven is at hand, and the kingdom of heaven is within you. So it's not about geography, it is about, in fact, a state of consciousness. So St. Paul believed that heaven was thought to be the future home of believers, that heaven was something you got to after you died. That's when you got to have an experience of the kingdom. And Peter affirmed that heaven is a place where the believer's inheritance is kept until the revelation of the Messiah, also putting it off way into the future. But you know, when we hear people talk about heaven, they kind of indicate that it's like upstairs, upstairs. And so I think actually they're onto something, because it really is, for us as metaphysical spiritual students, it is about a higher consciousness. So for us as students of the science of mind, we teach that God is spirit, and the creations of God are spiritual. Although to us sometimes when we look at the world around us and we see the creations of God, they look like they could be physical. They look like in some conditions they could be limited even. But the truth is that all of the creations of God are spiritual. Now our mind, though, brings something to the seeing. This is where we're all individuals, that our mind interprets what we see. So early this morning, I'm pacing in my backyard, because that's part of my preparation for Sunday morning. So early morning, I was doing the pacing portion of my preparation. And I noticed that even though all of the other rose bushes are completely empty, there is one bold, audacious rose bush that has two perfect orange rosebuds. As if to say, I don't care that it's January. I'm here. Now, to me, that is just positively thrilling, because I love to tend the roses in the garden. But I can also imagine that to somebody who was allergic, that would not be good news. To a deer, it would just look like breakfast, right? So everybody brings something to the seeing. But because we're all unique spiritual emanations of God. Now, Ernest Holmes teaches us that the kingdom of heaven is available to us to the degree that we become conscious of it. So he's saying, you can have heaven right here, right now. Heaven is available right now. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom of heaven is within you. Are you being aware of it? This is our piece. See, but we all bring something that is uniquely us to the seeing. And so people often wonder, like, well, where does that come from? I just don't understand. Or we have some idea where it comes from. And I think it's several things that at the human level that influence this. That there's what happens prenatally. All right, so we'll give that something. Early environment, education, personal experience. And also, and I think this is the most important thing, what the soul comes in with. Whatever the assignment is that your soul came in with to heal or grow or evolve through, that also is part of what we bring to the table. I remember my mother has said this a million times. She said, I have all children who are completely different from each other. I don't understand it. I fed you all the exact same thing. All right? You know, and so what is that, you know? Because we all grew up in the same house. We got the same number of birthday presents, the same number of Christmas presents. We were fed the same food, raised by the same people, you know? And I swear sometimes my siblings were raised by wolves. I do. I just don't get it. I just don't get it, you know? So this is what makes us us, you know, what we are humanly, you know, that everything I see through my past. So if I look out and I see a horrible world, those influences of my past are at work in me. But by the same token, if I look out and I see a wonderful world, a beautiful world filled with loving, caring, kind people, then those influences of my past are also at work in me. So don't hear that and say, well, okay, I'm a victim, you know, I have been through things. No, it's not that at all. It's that once you are an adult, you know, and we're big pants people now, right? We're big pants people. Once you are an adult, it becomes your responsibility to rise up, be big, heal what needs to be healed, forgive, let go, and give thanks for all of it. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. Because the truth is, we will never progress without it. Unless we can make that full trajectory, we will never progress without it. So the way I say this now is that the alpha and the omega of love, right? The alpha and the omega of love are forgiveness, because that's where we start. You know, somebody comes into your life and they do something, they're just a perfect impersonation of a farm animal. And they do something and you know, oh, God, I have to forgive. I have to forgive. I can't forgive yet. I'm not ready to forgive, but I'm willing. I'm willing to eventually be ready to think about forgiving as a possibility down the road. It's a place to start. It gets you into the park, right? And so then eventually you do the work and you forgive. You do the work, you forgive, you forgive, you forgive, you heal. Ultimately, where we have to get to, though, is giving thanks for it. You say, how could I ever give thanks for that? That was a horrible thing they said. That was a horrible thing they did. They messed up my life. They did da, 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 da. We have to give thanks for it because in the big picture of our spiritual evolution, it all came to grow us. It all contributed to us being, hopefully, more conscious than we were before. So this is why I say the alpha and the omega of love is that we start with forgiveness and ultimately get to thanks. So what does this look like? I'm going to give you very, very specific of how this outpictures in a daily spiritual practice. So just say your mother is still hovering. That there's something there. I don't know if there is or not, but if not, you can put your father or your siblings or anybody. And so you start with, I forgive my mother for all that she has done. I love her as I love myself. God is the love that I am. And you work with that for a while, till there's no juice left in it, you know? And then the next part of that is, I am grateful to my mother for all that she has done. I love her as I love myself. God is the love that I am. So do you see? So first part of it is about you getting healed, and then part of it is you recognizing, oh, it was all for my growth. It was all really, really for my growth. At the highest spiritual purview, I was in agreement with this, that this was all going to take place for my spiritual evolution. There was a level where all of that happened. She was being of service to me. Now, I know early on it doesn't look like that, right? You know, when you've just broken up with somebody or you've been fired or your neighbors called the police on you for the umpteenth time, you know, it doesn't look like that right away, right? I'm just saying, right? So this is why an inner spiritual life is so important. Because we cannot allow the interpretations of the mind, of the human personality, to be the only thing that guides our life. right? Because if you just go by your personality alone, you're going to constantly be tossed around like flotsam and jetsam. You know, the wind's going to blow you whoosh, over here, and then whoosh, over here, and over here, and you get stuck to this, and then attached to that. You know, but if you get still, and say, all right, I'm getting still. I want to think God's thoughts. What is God thinking about this situation that I'm not thinking right now? So for me, how that works is that I will remember something that I've read, or something in the scriptures, or some holy book, or the science of mind, or something that I've heard some teacher say. So, you know, I think my story, my personal story in the Bible is the prodigal son. I mean, that's me. I'm the prodigal son, except when I'm the stay-at-home brother. And then sometimes I have glimpses of, like, I could even be the father. And sometimes I'm the fatted calf. But I'm like everybody in the story. I really am. I'm everybody in the story at different times. And so when I sit and I say, all right, God, what's the greater truth here for me? I'll hear, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. This is what the father says when the prodigal son returns. He says that to the stay-at-home son. Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. So I think, all that God has is mine. I have no problem. Okay, I can continue. See, because assurance, the real assurance, comes from within. I know we've looked for assurance out in the world, but it didn't really do it, did it? Right? So I know from past experiences that my mind can create good, and it can create not so good. This was one of the things that clued me onto the spiritual path, was that I realized that I could really make a huge, huge mess of things in my life. That I had an extraordinary talent for that, in fact. I was very gifted in this regard. And so one day it occurred to me, as I was bemoaning my situation once again, and nobody was listening, it occurred to me that if I could make this big a mess of my life, if I could learn how to work with life, I could probably really do some good if I could just sort of learn what I was doing, because I knew I was really powerful. I mean, you had to be really powerful to make as big a mess of your life as I had made. I mean, only a really powerful person could do that, right? To make it that big a shambles. And so I thought, okay, so there is a power to be worked with here. I'm clearly using it against myself. Now, what if I used it in a constructive way? Well, I had to chew on that for months and months and months and months. So there was a man I was talking to recently, and he said, and this is exactly what he said. He said, well, tell me, how many people do you know who are really happy? So it's not even the question, it's where he was asking the question from, because you know there was no good answer to that question just from where it was being asked. How many people do you know who are really happy? And I thought, well, you know, I know a lot of people who I would say are really happy. But, you know, they're not happy because the blue bird of happiness has come and landed on them. They're happy because they have really made it their business to do what it takes to make their life something that they are pleased with. Now, I know that sounds really, really obvious, but, you know, this is what it comes to. This is what it comes to. How many people do you know who are really happy? So I think there are people in this room who fall into this category, and there are people in this room who are probably like the man who is thinking that's just an impossible thing. Nobody's happy. But you know, in A Course in Miracles, it says, the teacher of God must ask himself every day, God, where would you have me go? What would you have me do? What would you have me say? And to who? This is really pointing toward living a surrendered life, to saying, I'm really here for God. I'm here for something greater. So from the Hebrew legends, there's much about King Solomon. King Solomon, we all know, he was very, very wise. He was very wealthy. King Solomon was a great, great builder. And he sat on this throne. The throne was made of ivory and covered in gold. But the throne was not a seat of power, but it was a seat of truth. Because for King Solomon, he judged not by his own authority, but out of the truth of God as it was revealed in the Torah. So incidentally, this is why anybody who had the chair after King Solomon, those individuals who captured the chair, they were they were just sitting in a chair, right? Even though they had enormous worldly power, they were never able to do what Solomon did. So I think, like Solomon, we want to judge righteous judgment. And so for us, how that starts is, what's the spiritual truth here? What's the greater truth here? What do the scriptures promise me? See, the thinking and experience of the world is always forcing itself upon us. You know, through media, television, and radio, and news on the computer, and if anybody still reads a newspaper, are there any newspapers? Right? Through all of that, we're always being impressed with a level of thought. This is why Mary Baker Eddy says, you must stand porter at the gate of your mind. Is this thought worthy of me as an expression of God? Is this thought going to be helpful to me? Is this idea going to make my life better, or is it going to make my life worse? Is this conversation that I'm listening to right now, if I take this in, is this going to add to my life or take away from my life? Right? See, I have to have a strong spiritual consciousness to not be subject to all of that. Right? To not be at the effect of all that thinking and all that experience of the world. So, you know, part one of the spiritual journey, I think, is all about our human good, right? That we want to be healthy, and we want to be prosperous, and we want to have loving relationships. No, I think that's great. I think that's great because that gets us going. And, you know, and our thinking usually is, when I have these things, then I'll be happy, right? When I have these things, then I'll be happy. Now, science of mind gives us tools to heal and grow and have some mastery here, right? Ernest Holmes really got it. You know, that there are tools that people can work with, spiritual tools, spiritual laws that you can work with, and you can improve your health and your prosperity and your loving relationships. That absolutely works. But that is not the ultimate goal of life. You know, Peggy Lee was a brilliant, brilliant singer. She was also a religious science practitioner. She was very close to Ernest and Hazel Holmes. And one of the songs that she is really most famous for is That All There Is? Right? See, because this is what happens, that we come to a point on the spiritual path, and maybe you have a pretty good handle on health and prosperity and loving relationships, but something says, is that all there is? Is that all there is? And the point of that becomes the holy jumping off point, where you go to a deeper place spiritually. Because there is that little unsettled, is that all there is? Really? Is that it? Is this it? Really? This is it? This is it? I really thought that 100th pair of shoes was going to help. But it didn't. But it didn't. And I'm here to tell you, it didn't. It didn't. See, because those things, those outer things, are not the ultimate goal. You know, they're markers along the way, right? But Ernest really understood this, that we have to stabilize the outer structures of our life through mental science before we're ready to do the deeper spiritual work, the work of spiritual science. And so Ernest said this about Jesus. He said that Jesus was a man who knew himself and his direct relationship to the whole. He knew his relationship, his direct relationship to the whole. That this was, he says, this was the secret of his success. So I think, like with any master, if Jesus did this and this was the secret to his success, we could do that, and it would be the secret to our success. To know in any given situation, we are connected with the whole. This is the mystical truth that shows up in all traditions. So what this is a consciousness of oneness. This is kingdom consciousness. When we know that we're all connected, we're related to the whole, always. We're one with God, we're one with each other. People always want to blame it on God, don't they? People always, you know, they think back when times are bad to that wrathful God. You know, and it's like, you know, our trouble is not that there's a wrathful God, because I don't think there is. Our trouble is the darkness that exists in the minds of people. Yeah. You know, so I know that I will not be successful at trying to change all of human nature. But, so given that, what we can do, though, is that we can transcend. You know, so if you look at your life and you say, I'm surrounded by negative people, I'm surrounded by people who are not affirmative in their outlook, that they're always tearing things down and tearing everyone down and boo-hooing and how bad it is and what's happening in the world and all that. I'm sorry, so you're not going to be able to change all of that. But what you can do individually is you can transcend that. You know, part of how we do that is, what do I have to say about people? And what do I have to say about conditions? You know, that what I want to do is I want to rest in the spiritual truth. What is that spiritual truth? Well, for me, that spiritual truth is each and every one of us, we are stronger than our fears. And we are greater than whatever our seeming weakness is. We're greater than that. You know, that I am not a worm. You are not a worm. We are of God. In the kingdom of heaven, Jesus says, so when Jesus talked to the disciples, he taught one thing. But when he taught the masses, when he taught the multitude, he often taught in parables. Because people could take the parables, they'd remember the stories, and they'd chew on them. And you know, with things like this in the Bible, you chew on it for a while and chew on it for a while, and you suddenly go, oh, you get a little insight. You know, you get fed a little bit from it. So he says that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It's the smallest of seeds, but when it's grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in the branches. I was thinking about this, and I thought, I think it was like in the 60s, people wore mustard seeds in like a little tube around their neck. That was a very popular thing. I thought, God, I wished I had thought of that. That was a great idea. You know, I mean, they must have sold billions of those, right? Mustard seeds, you know, like, hey, I'm a mustard seed, you know. It just seemed like a really good idea to me. It was the predecessor to the Geopet, I guess, or something. So the mustard seed is incredibly small, right? And so very often for us, that's like the amount of faith we have. The amount of awareness we have is very, very small, right? So maybe a mustard seed for you today, because the kingdom of heaven is like unto a mustard seed. So for you to have a kingdom of heaven consciousness, maybe a mustard seed that you could plant is, I'm stronger than my fears. Whatever my fears are. Everybody has a worst case scenario. You know what it is. Now, so if you know what your worst case scenario is, your fear is, do you also know, or would you be willing to plant a mustard seed that I am stronger than my fears? Would you be willing to plant a mustard seed, I am greater than my weaknesses? I am greater than that. I am greater than that. See, because if we give the mustard seed the proper conditions in consciousness, it will absolutely grow. So, you know, Ram Dass has been a great spiritual teacher for me over the years. I've been to a number of things with him. I've read his books. And so he tells the story of early on in his spiritual journey that his guru, Neem Karoli Baba, would, so this was his Indian guru, that no matter what Ram Dass did, as soon as he was off base, you know what I mean, off base, he wasn't as loving and as conscious and as spiritually evolved as he knew he should be, the next time he'd see the guru knew. Even though the guru was nowhere around when Ram Dass did whatever unconscious thing he did, the guru always knew. And so Ram Dass started to refer to this. And see, this was out of his desire, out of his sincere desire to want to show up as a spiritually evolved, conscious person. He started to refer to this as his guru in drag. Yeah. That somebody would show up in his life and tempt him to not be loving, and tempt him to not be conscious, and tempt him to not have compassion. And he would catch himself and he'd go, this is just my guru in drag. Now, in Sanskrit, the word guru just means teacher, right? And so this is just my teacher here seeing, so you want to be conscious? You say you're loving? You say you're compassionate? You say you're a kind person? How about now? How about now? And so I would hold for each of us that in the week ahead, our teacher will show up, our guru will show up in drag again and again and again. And lots of really interesting disguises, you know? To see if we're serious about wanting to have a kingdom consciousness. Do we want to experience heaven on earth? See, because we could. We could, Ernest Holmes says, if we were aware of it, that this moment could be heaven right now. How could this moment be heaven right now? Well, if I knew that even in spite of the fact that this person before me was in a very unusual disguise, they just looked like the woman paying no attention to her screaming infant in the booth behind me at the restaurant, and just pretending to be doing nothing about it for the longest time. Through the order, through the waiting for the food, through the eating of the food, through the paying of the check. My guru in drag. All of it, an opportunity for me. Or, you know, you go to the bank and there's 43 people in line at the Wells Fargo on Ventura Boulevard. And somebody decides to tell the teller their life story. Life story. Now, all they wanted was change for a 20. But they're going to tell the teller their life story on Christmas Eve. It has to be my guru in drag, right? They're just my teacher. Just in that moment, they're just my teacher saying, am I as conscious as I think I am? What's emanating out from me? What's the predominant energy coming out of my heart and my nostrils? Yeah. So, see, you know, it's now our responsibility to create the proper conditions for something new to grow, you know? So here's a mustard seed again. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom of heaven is within you. I realize that for many of us today, that is just a mustard seed. That's just a very tiny, 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 infinitesimal notion, and it hasn't grown much yet. But I believe it will. And you say, well, I don't see heaven in my life. I don't see heaven in those people in the restaurant or in line at the bank or wherever. But see, this is the thing. It's always there in potential, waiting for us to stir it up. It's always there in potential, waiting for us to be the ones to recognize it and call it forth. Let's pray. So we turn our attention inward for a moment to recognize we are surrounded and filled with an infinite spirit of love and light and healing. It is the truth about each and every one of us. We are one with God. We are one with each other. We are one with all life. And so in this awareness of our connection, I speak the word for us that the kingdom of heaven is within us. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. And I know that that is so to the degree that we become aware of it. And so I claim for us today an increased awareness of God's infinite good that's available to each and every one of us, and to the unseen good of God that just exists as pure potential within us. I know that in the days and weeks ahead, that there will be many opportunities for us to see our guru in drag, to see the spiritual teacher in our life in some disguise. And because we know it, we still show up as our best spiritual self. So I know that good and only good comes from this, that this is how we experience more of the kingdom right here, right now on earth today. We include in our prayer our family members, our friends, our loved ones, and we know that right where they are, God is in its fullness. We let our prayer be a blessing in the world, so whatever looks difficult or distressing to the human eye, we claim that there is a spiritual truth that makes all people more free, that God is present right there. We bless our church. We bless all churches everywhere, synagogues and temples and mosques and ashrams, all paths to God. And I know that we are blessed. We are all raised up in consciousness by being together. And so with an open, gracious, full heart, I give thanks that this is so, and so it is. Together we all say, Amen.